moving on to our next presenters. So we are going to get into the panel of scary cybersecurity stories. So these are going to be some real life horror stories from the panel of cybersecurity experts, which is going to be moderated by Ax Sharma, who is coming to us today all the way from London. So Ax is a tech columnist and security researcher at Sonatype, and he will be joined by some of our other panel members, which we'll bring up in a second here, that will be sharing some real life examples of things that have led to some very, very scary stories. So with that, I will hand that over to Ax and team and take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nick. Hello, everyone. Hope you can hear me fine. Thanks for tuning in for us to share your scary cybersecurity stories. I'm Ax Sharma. Like Nick said, I'm a security researcher at Sonatype and a tech columnist at Bleeping Computer, CSO Online, and some other tech publications. So I'm thrilled to moderate this panel discussion today with our awesome group. We have with us Jason D. Christopher. He's a principal cyber risk advisor at Dragos. We have Tomiko Evans, cybersecurity specialist at Cybercrime Support Network. We have Dr. Gregory Hill from the Center for Cybersecurity at the University of West Florida. And last but certainly not the least, we have with us Brad Herring, Vice President of Business Development at Raxis. And he's appropriately calling this session a herring haunting at Curriculaville. So all panelists, happy to have you here. I'll try not to interrupt too much. Let's just try our best to make sure everyone gets roughly equal time. Now, I'd like for each of the panelists to start by sharing one of their scariest real cyber stories. So starting off with you, Jason.
All right. Hope everyone's doing well. I was trying to figure out, can I do the light for the scary, spooky stories? I meant that's probably not going to work out too well. Okay, so we'll put that down. So I really wanted to focus on things that have happened within the operational context, the industrial sort of complex of things. That's really where my background comes from. Thank you, Ax, for that introduction, and really happy to be here on this panel. As he had mentioned, I am the principal cyber risk advisor at Dragos. And we focus on industrial cybersecurity, the things that are the zeros and ones that if something were to happen to them, you start losing an industrial process. So not necessarily the zeros and ones that are the data that we care about for the perspective of credit card information or billing data, but the zeros and ones that will move a physical process, a product, an assembly line, the electric grid, natural gas, things of that nature on the utility scale, which is great to be able to already see so many fantastic presenters today sort of tapping onto that. Previous to Dragos, within my former life, I had also worked as sort of a cyber risk leader at a firm called Axio, where I was a chief technology officer. And I'd also worked in the government space. So I was the incident response lead for cybersecurity at the US Department of Energy. I'd also created some standards when I was there, as well as working at FERC, where I had led the SIP version 5 development, for those of you who are policy wonks and regulatory know-how, similar to what we had already seen from SPP. So within that context, the things that I want to be able to sort of describe and think through are the scary stories in the industrial side. And I'll start off, as all good stories do, with a phishing attack, which is why it's really great talking about click-through rates, right? So a phishing attack is where somebody clicks on a link that they shouldn't have. And in this utility, somebody had got an email that looked like it was from the government, that was very official looking, and said, hey, would you like to know more about this thing happening in your area that the government's very concerned about? So of course the operator is like, yeah, I absolutely want to know more. Just have to download this Word file. Oh, you want me to enable macros? Absolutely. It's from the government. What could possibly go wrong? Enable the macros, and what they didn't know is on the other side of that equation, in another room somewhere else, somebody was saying, yes, they clicked the link. Once they clicked that link, it actually allowed an adversary to get an additional foothold into that utility. And over the span of a year or more, this adversary was mapping out all the different assets in the IT part of the business, slowly gaining a foothold into other systems, finally getting to sort of a crown jewels of what goes on in the VPN that allowed them to traverse into the OT side, the operations side, the thing that I'm really concerned about from the industrial control system piece. And once they're able to figure out, well, what systems are running here? What additional sort of usernames and passwords are default here? What are the vulnerabilities that I can exploit? And over this period of a year, started mapping out an attack plan. And this sort of accumulated further down the road, where they're able to do this to multiple utilities simultaneously. So 3 utilities sort of got hacked by this same entity that was going through and mapping out all of their systems. Now, what was interesting, and again, if you think about the different rooms that are involved here, I've got an operator room at one utility. That's going to have a very different attack that I'm about to describe. I have an operator room at another set of utilities that also are going to have a little bit of a different type of attack. And because of the culture, sort of the awareness piece internally, they would have addressed it differently. And then there's the third room, the adversary room, right? Where you may imagine, especially if we're talking about a nation state adversary, somebody high up saying, and now we go. And when they say, and now we go, all of a sudden, fingers to keyboards, executing on attacks. For this attack in particular, there was also another thing where they did a telephone denial of service, which for utilities is really important. Because when you think about a utility and sort of the makeup of what we do in the industrial space, in order to understand whether or not there's an outage, if we don't have the ability to view things, then we would suddenly rely on people calling us, right? Somebody saying, oh, I have a power outage, and then responding accordingly. But denial of service on telephone means that now I can't not only sort of operate things if this attack were to be successful, but I also can't get the phone lines working. And that's what happened. Within this sort of simultaneous attack hitting multiple utilities at the same time, you're able to see on one screen, the first operator room, right? The first operator room, this person's just sitting around, typing on the keyboard, operating, the grid looks great. All of a sudden, the mouse moves without them touching it and starts opening up critical pieces of their network. They could see right then and there that something bad was happening. They weren't touching anything. Nobody in the room was remoting into their computer to do it for them. They knew pretty much that something on the cybersecurity end was happening to them. Now, from a cultural perspective, from a incident response perspective, it's probably more of an incident reaction. Some of the people who were there were able to describe it in terms of somebody saying, this isn't me. Somebody double check, this isn't me. Should I take a video and make sure that my boss knows that this wasn't me who's doing this? Compared to, well, who do I call? What is my exercise routine for going through this? It was a very different sort of knee-jerk reaction. Now we go to the other utilities where they didn't have somebody moving the mouse for them, and therefore they had a very different type of reaction. Instead, for them, it looked like a communications outage. They weren't able to see things on a remote side of their network. They weren't able to interact with devices that would allow them to balance the generation and load that constantly needs to happen when you're managing this industrial process. And so for them, that looked like a maintenance event. Not every cyber attack, especially when we talk about industrial space, is going to be like the classic 1995 film, The Hackers. I won't have a virus singing row, row, row your boat while it's capsizing things. Instead, it may look and feel like an engineering event, a maintenance event. Oh, we lost communications? Well, that typically happens. We'll send an engineer out there and it'll be fine. But what if it actually is a cybersecurity event? And that's what these different utilities had to do simultaneously. 3 different utilities were impacted at around the same time, that they were not able to respond or recover their natural industrial processes. It took them hours to get back in operational, and even in a degraded state, so going to manual operations, sending people out to the substations, being able to manually operate things that were typically automated. And that impacted 250,000 people without power for 6 hours. Impacted roughly 50 substations total. For those of you who are power engineers, it's about 135 megawatts. It's a couple of small towns worth of load, which is significant. Now, for those of you who are in the power industry, who are in the know, yes, I am describing the Ukrainian event in 2015, not the sequel that happened in 2016, where we saw now sort of a more automated approach targeting one utility. And when you think through that, what I really want people to understand is that's what a cybersecurity attack could look like in other aspects of the world. I don't want people to discount them and say, oh, well, that was happening in Ukraine, and there was a geopolitical sort of strife that was happening there between the Ukrainians and another nation state adversary, and so this is bound to happen. Really, what you should be thinking about is, if I am an operator of any industrial process whatsoever, what would I do to react to an incident like that? How would I respond? Would my operators understand if there was a mouse moving without them touching it? That could be a cybersecurity incident, and who would they call? Also, how long would it take an operator to understand if they lost communications, if it looked like a maintenance event, how long would they be able to understand that I need to call somebody from cybersecurity to help me out here? Those are the scariest stories for me. The ones that we don't necessarily know what's happening, that it could be a maintenance event. It could be this other unknown category of events. And that happens quite a lot in industrial processes. Sometimes things fail and we try to do root cause analysis. We'll get our engineers out there. We'll get the vendors out there. We'll do a full investigation. And at the end of it, we'll just say, I don't know. Those are the scary stories. Now, that's to say, we actually do a really great job at protecting the grid and our critical infrastructure. This is not a scary story without some sort of happy ending. We do a lot of protection. I think it's really great seeing this event today, seeing already a lot of the sort of cultural things that are changing. To adopt cybersecurity as part of an ingrained culture is really important, because your operators and the people who will help you prevent these attacks from happening are on the front line. And when they understand that safety and engineering is linked to cybersecurity and that culture piece happens, super critical and super important, but also leads to a better tomorrow. So that's my sort of first foray into talking about scary stories. I am delighted to be on this panel. I've got a few more if we ever get into some more Q&A, but I definitely want to toss it over to the other presenters. So Ax, thank you again for the introduction and for hosting this panel. And I look forward to the other scary stories from our panelists.
Of course, thank you, Jason. That was very insightful. Next up, we have Dr. Gregory Hall from University of West Florida. And Dr. Hall, you've got so many great stories to share. Can you tell us about your incredible career and your scariest cyber story?
Thank you, Ax. Howdy, everyone. I'm Dr. Greg Hall. I'm a research scientist in cybersecurity at the University of West Florida. I have a joint appointment at the Institute for Human and Machine Cognition in Pensacola, Florida. I earned my doctorate at the University of Idaho in computer science, and then I spent 9 years as a full-time professor at Texas State University. Eventually, I began research in the emerging field of digital forensics. This led to a career change, and I spent the next 12 years as a cleared defense contractor working on projects for the intelligence and defense communities. Through those contracts, I've worked in just about every area of cyber, including malware analysis, vulnerability discovery, and cyber operations tool development. I'm now back in an academic setting, performing research and developing hands-on training for the next generation of cyber professionals. I'd say my scariest cyber story, similar to Tamiko's, was one where I was the target and the adversary was counting on my own fallibility. I was attending Black Hat in Las Vegas one year while working for a large defense contractor. A friend of mine and we were wearing our company swag to represent the company at this event. We were standing in the taxi line at Mandalay Bay Casino, catching a ride to the Rapid 7 party, which is the big party to attend each year. We were approached by another conference goer who asked if he could share a cab with us, and we said yes. However, he then began to ask us questions about the company and a specific project, which he referred to by its internal company code name. He started asking for technical details. Eventually, I thought I had turned the conversation to a different topic, and we finally got into the cab. The scary part was that the cab driver then remarked about our company affiliation and continued down with the technical questions. Now, this was a case of corporate spies, as well as the hope that my friend and I would be unwitting insider threats to our company. A similar event happened to me on a Caribbean cruise when a Russian passenger approached me at a bar, and we started having a polite conversation until I realized this person knew details about my life that I had not told them yet. Now, a scary story closer to home and on a more technical nature, my parents called me one day and they told me their computer wasn't working and had the blue screen of death showing. And Dee Dee, could you bring up the image I provided in the slide deck? So this isn't the exact screen I saw when I went to their house to help, but it's pretty darn close. Now, tech people will see a lot wrong in this image, but the average computer user might not. This blue screen doesn't look like the real one you get on Windows 10. But the bigger clue is that the Windows 10 taskbar is still at the bottom of the screen. If Windows had died, that would be gone. The image also shows a title bar at the top. What you're seeing is a web page crafted to look like a blue screen of death. and it was part of a scam hoping to get people to call that number provided on the screen so that they could continue the scam and try to get money out of people to recover their computer for them. So that's a couple of my scary stories. Back over to you, Ax.
Thanks, Dr. Hall. Next up, we have Brad Herring, VP of Business Development for Raxis. Now, between your experience, Brad, and the work your pen testers, do for your clients, you've got some stories to share with us, I'm sure. Go on.
Thanks, Ax. Yeah, everybody likes to hear the James Bond kind of stories about how we break into buildings and then into networks. So a couple of really quick stories. One really big one was a data center that we were breaking into as part of engagement. And we decided to break into a lower value target to begin with. And we stole some letterhead from this particular company and went up to the hotel, did some research online, and we crafted ourselves an authorization letter to tour the data center. And we showed up the next day and rang the bell and tried to use this letter to get us into the data center. And the customer had told us that if we even get into the building, they considered it a fail. And so the security guard on the other end, he wasn't really taking the bait, and he was giving us a hard time. It was cold outside. We were really amping it up. And about that time, an employee came out, and we're like, tailgating, we're in. And so went to grab the door, and the employees closed the door and said, it's a security protocol, I can't let you guys in, you have to badge in. And we're like, yeah, it's awesome. And that happened a couple of times as employees came out. And so we kept working the guard, we're showing them this letter, saying it's been a terrible week. And they've been failing and putting all the pressure on. And then we said, we basically asked them if they would let us come in. And so this other employee comes out and she says, hey, I can't let you in, but I can go in and talk for you. And so that's what they ended up doing. And as a result, they ended up letting us come into the building. And once we're in the building, I noticed they were talking mostly to my coworkers. So I just walked away and nobody paid any attention to me. And when I came back, it escalated. There was a person there who looked really unhappy to be there. And the people in the room looked kind of afraid that he was there. And I noticed he had a badge, and I happened to have my badge replicator on me in a little messenger bag. And so I walked in and walked over next to this gentleman and got a successful read on his badge. We took our paperwork and said, hey, it's not your fault. You're trying to help. Really appreciate that. And let us just come back tomorrow after we've resolved this issue. And then we went out to the vehicle and made sure we had a good badge, and we came back in, and sure enough, that let us in. So we were able to get in the building, past the man traps, completely into the server farm, and nobody knew we were there until they saw the report later. And then real quickly, that's kind of the 007. But another instance, we were doing a pen test, and we had full domain administration of the network, dotting our I's and crossing our T's. And we found a telnet session, and so the guys decided to hit it. And they tried default creds, and it let them in. And so we're in this telnet session, they're kind of prodding around, and they start seeing things that seem kind of suspicious. And so we call this the hack that could have ended the world. And when they started looking through, they were seeing things like control rods and core temperature, and they realized that we were in a nuclear reactor. And they called our contact and like, good Lord, yeah, you're in our nuclear reactor, stop, everybody get out. They had a nuclear reactor on site they failed to tell us about that was behind default creds on a telnet session that was readily accessible. So while it really couldn't have destroyed the world, we feel like it probably could have put a small crater in that town. So those are kind of some things, we see, and we see a lot. Probably 85% of the time or so, we're able to get in and find those kind of results. So it's definitely something worth talking about today. And I appreciate you guys all being here. And Ax, thank you for moderating this.
Yeah, absolutely. Pleasure. Thanks, Brad. So my next question for the panel then is, when it comes to a cyber attack, and it's not a question of, if, but when it happens, what are you supposed to do? Like, is there a set of guidelines? Do you call the police, like with a real theft? When you discover something, right, like, how are we supposed to address it? And Dr. Hall, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Ax. The first thing most people think to do when an incident occurs is to pull the plug on the affected machine. It's the natural response when you realize you've been hacked. However, doing that can destroy evidence or any chance of catching the perpetrators. Having dealt with the FBI on cyber attack responses in the past, it's sometimes preferable to keep the system online and to not give an indication that the attack was detected. This can allow law enforcement to monitor what the attacker is doing, find out what they're after, and possibly move upstream to find out where they're operating from. This does take bravery on the part of the victim, though.
Great answer. Thanks, Dr. Hall. Jason, same question for you.
Yeah, so I actually agree with Dr. Hall, really making sure that you understand, especially when I think again of like sort of the industrial perspective, there's not going to be necessarily a lot of different devices out there that have the evidence that you'd want to see and have. So maintaining that evidence is really important. But when we talk about industrial spaces, for those of you who are sort of in industrial, whether it's manufacturing or utilities, you also understand that safety comes first, and operations and reliability. And so security may take a back seat in some cases. The best way to understand where you've got that information, right? What devices could you get logs from? What could you actually monitor across your OT environment to be able to help you afterwards understand there was an event? The best way you can do that is to test. To have a plan, train that plan, test like it's game day. Because absolutely, when you have, for example, law enforcement coming in and asking for evidence and saying, well, we need to be able to quarantine that device, you need to be able to say, well, actually that device is needed for reliability. I need to make sure that we can still access that thing, so I can't give that to you. And so being able to understand that really requires organizations to internalize what those plans are, similar to what Dr. Hall had said, and train those things. Make sure that, again, it's part of that culture, part of that DNA of how you do business.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jason. Now we have, I'd like to hear Dr. Brad's thoughts.
Yeah, Jason, I really agree with what he says. A lot of that, when we see customers call us for this exact thing, first question he asks us, what kind of logs do you have? And that's usually the first time they've realized they don't have logs, or they don't have logs like they think they have, or they haven't been recording them as long as they could. And it all comes back to prevention, right? So if you know that you're ready for this, you know how to isolate machines, you know what your inventory is, you know what the logs are. When you're in the middle of this, you can react to it a lot quicker. So that's certainly our advice as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Brad. And my next question for the panel is related to COVID-19, right? The global pandemic is an ongoing horror story. Our world has had to change rapidly. And according to reports, there's been a 500% increase in cyber attacks, especially from phishing. I myself had reported on COVID phishing scams and cyber attacks. Recently, Canadian government systems were targeted with credential stuffing attacks by attackers to divert the COVID-19 relief payments. So these are some examples, and I'd like to hear from Tomiko. I'd like to hear your thoughts, particularly what you've seen about remote workforce.
Yes, thanks, Ax. Well, actually, during the COVID-19, I've seen so many phishing attacks, robocalls, shopping scams, and the thing is, a lot of the scammers are focusing more on the elderly and people that are just vulnerable while working from home. Because you're more susceptible to these attacks while working from home because you're not used to that type of environment. And even with elderly people that not on the internet so much, they are getting scammed on so many levels where they're constantly clicking on buttons because whatever the scammers are feeding them, they are constantly taking it in. And I know, like with my mom, she knows about computers and everything, but at the same time, because during COVID, she cannot go too many places. So she's always on the computer shopping. And I don't know if you know, dealing with, the whole technology, if you're constantly searching on specific items on the internet, they kind of track that. And then all of a sudden they'll give you a website. And this is with my mom. She ended up getting she was shopping for a bike, and she saw a good price. And then all of a sudden, she ended up seeing this link to buy this bike. She clicked on it. It was a fake website. And she ended up buying a bike and everything. And she never got her bike. So with her, she ended up calling PayPal, because she used PayPal to purchase the bike, and they was able to give her money back. But there are some, some people that are not that lucky to get their money back. And also, if you're just working from home, you have to understand, with everything that's going on around you, everything, mentally, physically, like within your house, kids playing, you're not thinking about securing your systems. You're not thinking about making sure that you have the correct Wi-Fi connection. You're not thinking about adding VPN to your computer system. You're not thinking about that, because all the stress and struggles that's going on, because you're working from home and you're used to tech support, desktop support, coming at any type of need that you have. And it's not as easy as doing that from home. But also with robocalls, you're mainly using your own cell phone, to take different calls from, if you're not using the computer, you're using your phone. And there's a lot of robocalls that's constantly coming in, especially during COVID, because these scammers and bad guys, they are just pretty much constantly feeding you information and constantly telling you, hey, you have to pay something, or you have to do something urgently. So to be honest, if you go to Scam Spotter,
Tomiko, your video is
that
frozen. Sorry to interrupt.
My video's frozen? It's
Yeah,
frozen
it
now?
keeps. It's better, but it just kept freezing for me. Carry on.
Oh, okay. So I want to let people know to go on, scamspotter.org, which is one of our websites, to help people understand if they do have some type of fraud attack. Fraud attack or anything like that. It will show them some of the characteristics that would help you get to the point where you won't be a victim of that attack. And the 3 steps that needs to be taken with that is to slow it down. Don't do anything urgently. Spot check. You need to research, the website, and try to understand the things that can show you that it is a phishing attack, and don't send any type of payments until you do your research for it. So, but I've seen a lot of things, video conference bombing, just so much. And I just tell people just to slow it down and not get in a hurry to answer any type of questions that these scammers are trying to get from you.
Thanks, Tomiko. Okay, so my next question for the panel, and then we'll see if we have time for some audience questions. We're running out of time here. So how do you make security awareness training relatable so people understand how real these attacks can be? Jason, we'll start with you.
Sure, thank you. So for me, what's been interesting over my career is I've actually been lucky enough to do, and we're in October, we're in Cybersecurity Awareness Month, right? In non-COVID times, we would go off and do presentations for Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And a very large utility had asked me to give them a briefing. So I said, okay, cool. I dust up on all the different threats, the nation state adversaries, the things that their security team would really want to know for cybersecurity awareness. And then they told me they also wanted me to give one to the entire utility, thousands of employees. And I said, okay, that's a very different presentation, right? Because the things that you really want to know from a security awareness perspective in a security team is going to be the latest threats, the things that I'm most concerned about to maintain sort of that reliability and that operations, the things on the industrial side that I've been talking through. But for the average employee, they're really not going to care about that. And they really shouldn't. It's not part of their day-to-day. And so for security awareness, for me to see it really ingrained in that culture and get sort of that behavioral change that we constantly talk about that we want, it's got to be something relatable, something personable. So instead, I made an entire slide deck to go out to all the thousands of people out there to be able to discuss, what do you do at home for security? Because no employee wants to be the one that clicked on the bad link that made them lose their job or made somebody else lose reliability within the organization, right? Nobody wants to be that person. So in arming them on how to do this on their day-to-day, one of the things that have been found to be very useful is relating to their day-to-day at home life. And I think that Tomiko had a lot of great examples of sort of how COVID has changed some of that. How many people know how to go into their wireless router that's provided from their internet company to say, oh, I need to lock down the firewall? How do they know how to log into that? How would they know to even look for something like that? Do they use a password manager? Some of those very, very basics. And then very similar to what you've been hearing, I like to be able to tell some personal stories. Because again, if it can happen to any of us on this panel, it can happen to anybody else out there as well. A few years ago, for example, one of the stories that I do talk about a little bit because it's just kind of funny. But when Pokemon Go was a thing, like, I mean, I know that some people probably still use it, but when it was like a really big thing and everyone is going around and trying to catch all the Pokemon, my stepson had actually gone out with family over the period of a summer and came back to the house. And all of a sudden, my network was trying to ping out to other countries that I knew it should not try to do any of that with, right? And it just so happens that I have all that gear set up. I know what that looks like. And I said, the only thing that's changed is that he came back from the summer and now Pokemon Go is trying to ping out the thing. So let's go ahead and look at your phone. And he said, well, how long would it take to look at your phone? Oh, I don't know. iPhones are very complicated. A couple of days. I was just making that up, right? It took like a couple hours, maybe tops. Oh, it looks like you actually put up a fake app that was not in the App Store that bypassed all the controls that we have on this so that you could actually install a management system that's being broadcasting out to this other country that's taking all your photos and all these other things. I need to totally revamp this phone. I need to just kill the whole thing. I need to reconstruct it. You're going to lose all of your data. I'm sorry, I can't do anything about that. How long will that take? Weeks, maybe weeks. iPhones are hard. He's gonna see this video sometime later and be like, wait, what? It took like a couple hours too. But the lesson was learned that there are sort of impacts there that happen to you on a personal level. And I have a very secure sort of home system as best as you can try to have internally, right? I mean, that doesn't mean that I've got industrial grade anything, but I can at least detect things. I can sort of monitor things and make sure that we're doing the best internal for our family. And if these things are difficult, even for security professionals, imagine somebody who's got no experience at it. And how do you arm them and equip them with information that allows them to do that? And maybe it requires you as an organization to go back and say, this is what a home firewall looks like. And we can help you with this because it's really hard right now. And we understand that. I think that Tomiko had some really great examples. And so I'll just leave it at that. It's making it personal. It's making it really important to your home life and what it is you need to do on the day-to-day.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jason. Now, the same question for the next panelist, Dr. Hall. What are your thoughts? How do you make security awareness trainings relatable so people understand how real these attacks can be?
Thanks, Ax. I'll draw upon my industry career for this to start with. For 12 years, I left academia. I joined a company called Mantech. After Mantech, I went to a small business that later led me to Harris Corporation. I was at Endgame, and then I ended up at Accenture Federal Services. But when I was at those three big defense contractors, every year we had security awareness training. And every year it was completely obvious that they just wanted to check the box that held us as employees responsible if we did something dumb. The security awareness training, it always seemed like it was just making sure that the company was covering itself and the employees, they could tell us, they could tell the customers and everybody else if we did something wrong, it wasn't their fault. They gave us the training. And of course, that doesn't make it very relatable to people. When I came back to academia, I was asked to create a first course on cybersecurity fundamentals. And what I decided to do to try to make it relatable is I start that course with a hands-on lab in a protected sandboxed environment. And what the participants do is they log into a computer as they would their work machine or even their home machine, and they can see, their files and their pictures. And I put some dummy files and pictures out there on this virtual machine. And then I have them check their email. And there's an email client on the virtual machine. They bring up the email and they see there's an urgent request from their boss to complete the annual cybersecurity awareness training. And it has an attachment, and they're supposed to view the attachment, sign it, and return it as soon as possible. But the attachment that I put on that email is the WannaCry ransomware. And so as soon as they open the attachment, it immediately encrypts their documents, posts the ransom note on the desktop. And I think that really hits home and makes it relatable, as opposed to just saying, don't click links in emails. They actually see firsthand how easy it is to get one of these emails, open something that they shouldn't. It runs rampant and causes damage. I think that really resonates with people, as opposed to you watch this video, sign that you've been trained, see you again next year. So being able to have them experience a cyber attack, albeit in a safe environment, I think that really makes it more relatable and meaningful to them.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Hall. Brad, same question for you on translating these real threats into cybersecurity awareness trainings.
Yeah, Dr. Hall, I completely agree. I mean, we talk to our customers about this all the time, and people say, man, you must feel really bad doing these pen tests and then getting people fired afterwards. And our response is, we certainly hope the employees aren't fired because they're your best trained employees ever. And what we've seen is when, Jason, I think you mentioned that nobody wants to be that employee, but at the same time, we don't always do a good job of explaining why we have these policies in place. And when they're able to see an attack completely unfold, whether it's from a sandbox or an assessment, or even after action of a real world attack, and they see that, man, I clicked that link in phishing and I gave credentials, and as a result, pop, 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 here's what they got, and they got there fast. Maybe if I had alerted IT sooner, as that protocol states, we could have helped this. And I think you really get your employees on as evangelists for you, where they're no longer just looking at, man, there's another stupid video I've got to watch, or a policy just came down, or why are they making my job difficult? But the better job that we do communicating why these are there and the results that happen when they're ignored, I think that's what really gets our employees on board, gets them interested in wanting to be more aware and understanding the risk that's really behind that curtain.
Awesome. Thank you, Brad. We have an audience question from Robel Petros. I hope I said that correctly. What are some of the scariest phishing attacks you're afraid of for both businesses and consumers? I would pass off the mic to Jason.
Sorry about that. Technical difficulties, always fun. Yeah, so I would say again, for me, it's anything that may find its way sort of getting into that industrial space. But I think what we've seen from those phishing attacks that have been really scary on the ransomware, and hearing Dr. Hall talk about WannaCry in particular is a really good note. We've gone from where ransomware used to be single machine, single victim focused, to now being opportunistic and whole network focused. So instead of having one employee click on something and it affects their machine, we now have one employee clicks on something. And what we just saw, for example, with Norsk Hydro, was you then saw it writes its ransom note, it encrypts all the files. It also, while it's doing that, changes your default username and passwords, logs you off of the machines, and disables your network card. Now you've got something that's wormable that's going through all of your networks and locking everything down. You're being blasted back to the 1960s. Try to do payroll without your computers. Try to have any phone calls if you have voice over IP without the network that it would be attached to. Those for me are some of the things that we're seeing trend-wise that really concern me from a phishing attack perspective. Something that's wormable and has sort of a high impact. And then when we think about industrial space, could accidentally as collateral damage get into the OT space if we're not truly air gapped or we don't have those OT protections in place? That becomes more of a nightmare scenario. That's one of the things that keeps me up at night now is sort of the untargeted collateral damage, burn everything while you go type of attacks.
Brilliant. So thanks, Jason. One more follow-up question on that. So it's a bit unrelated, but we have another member of the audience, Scott N. He's asking, what is something really spectacular, which was about the Stuxnet virus? Not something that we have heard thousands of times before, but like what really stood out about that?
Spectacular about it? Oh man, that's some verbiage there. So I would say that again, from the perspective of being there at the time at FERC, at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, when we saw this sort of come into being, we sort of had indicators that this could be a type of attack that we would need to brace for. And seeing Stuxnet, seeing the Ukraine even scenarios play out, where we've been saying, hey, this could happen, this could happen, this could happen, and then it happens. And it's using default username and passwords, right? The hard-coded passwords that were exploited in Stuxnet as an example. Hard-coded meaning that even though they're default, they're also things I can't change. It's not soft-coded, it's hard-coded. It's embedded in the device. And so these are things that really were scary as a cybersecurity analyst looking at it in the lens of what could happen in the next couple of years. And then in 2010, seeing all the activity that was coming to light, that really did, I think, was a wake-up call that the protections that we want to have in place, dealing with default username and credentials, nothing really special in a lot of these cases, except for well-researched attacks. And that was definitely the I think, more spectacular, spooky areas of that.
Very well, very well put, Jason. I'd like to hear Dr. Hall's thoughts on this too. What was spectacular about Stuxnet?
I can neither confirm nor deny any knowledge of Stuxnet. That's the facetious answer. I actually, it's been a long time since I've looked into it. I think, you know, and I'm afraid I can't go beyond really what's been covered to death in the media, but the fact that it was kind of one of the first attacks that was really having a physical effect on the asset, as opposed to, you know, just a denial of service or something. I mean, it was able to destroy stuff or potentially destroy stuff.
Well, good news, Dr. Hall. Then I have another member of the audience, Osvaldo Quintero. They're asking how to be hacked looks like. Osvaldo, could you clarify the question a bit? I think they're trying to understand so they can tell their users in a better way that to be hacked, how does it look like?
So it can look like a whole bunch of different things. WannaCry is very, very verbose. It wants you to know it's there, right? The way the WannaCry, you know, if it hits your machine, you're not going to not know. It changes the desktop background. It pops a ransom note. It litters the hard drive with instructions on how to pay the ransom. The worst case is if you've got an advanced persistent threat and then you don't know you've been hacked. There's absolutely no indication. There's no CPU spikes. There's no loss of hard drive that's noticeable. There's no loss of bandwidth or high consumption or traffic going somewhere. It all depends on the type of attack, the sophistication of the hacker, and what they're trying to do. If you're just getting hit by a script kiddie or a simple attack, then you're going to notice high bandwidth, high CPU usage, high disk utilization, because it's going to be a smash and grab sort of a thing. And so if your computer gets slow, your internet seems to be slow for no reason, if you're running out of hard drive space and you don't know why, those are, you know, indicators of something that's either broken in your machine or perhaps you've got some sort of a malware infection. But it can really, really run the full gamut. And if you are lucky and you have people who are monitoring your traffic and maybe have intrusion prevention, intrusion detection systems, you know, some of those logs might trip, or you might get some alerts from those tools. But as a home user, it becomes really hard if you aren't monitoring like Jason is for traffic going to foreign countries that doesn't really have any business going there. But I'll let the other panelists chime in.
Thank you, Dr. Hall. So then, Brad, I'd like to hear your thoughts too on this, that what does it look like for the user when you get hacked? I think like Osvaldo, and especially on their screen, like what are the signs we can tell employees to look for?
Sure, and you know, they're right. It looks like a lot of different things depending on the type of the attack. Anything that's unusual, right, that you haven't initiated. So I'm thinking of an assessment we did where we didn't delete the trash after a phish, and the user recognized that, and they came back and said they sent emailed a help desk and said, hey, I see the suspicious activity. And, they were alerting to us. And actually, in that case, help desk responded and said, nah, that's normal, nothing to worry about. But it wasn't normal. It was an attacker, and we had persistent access in that network ever after that because they didn't do a simple password reset. So certainly any type of spikes in usage, the outbound traffic, like we talked about, seeing things that looks odd there. But from a user perspective, just monitoring is something as simple as your email. The phish goes a lot deeper than just trying to get credentials, because we actually mine that email. We look for a lot of information in that. So there's a lot of tracks that can be left from an attacker in that specific instant, that if a user is really paying attention, they could notice and reach out and ask for help.
Awesome. Thanks, Brad. So I have one more question for everyone. How do you convince executives that aren't experienced in security that these threats are real and that your organization needs to be prepared? I guess we'll start off, and actually all panelists take like 10 seconds to think. It's not fair for me to put anyone on the spot, but I'll start with you, Brad, and go backwards.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, this is a big thing. I mean, we look in the news and we see more and more and more breaches. Users are tired of having their data hijacked. And so I think that's really the thing we point to, is just the reality of the increase of all the things we're seeing in the news. And it's not a matter of if, but a matter of when, and a matter of trying to keep yourself as heavily defended, hopefully that the hacker is going to be lazy and just want to go to the next target that's not maybe quite as fortified as you. But I think when we just look at history and look at what's happening in our environments, that we know that cyber attack is on the rise, and it's going to continue to be on the rise. And that type of awareness training, I think, goes a long way towards helping management get on board.
Thanks, Brad. So then I'd like to ask Dr. Hall a slightly different question. Like, how do we tell employees not to be scared? How do we build trust so that if something bad or something does go wrong, something suspicious happens, they can come to IT for help, that they shouldn't be scared to report these things?
That's a very, very important question, Ax. And my background originally was in software quality assurance. What you need in that area when you're a computer programmer is management has to understand that programming is difficult. Programmers are going to make mistakes. There's going to be bugs in the code. You don't want to punish programmers for revealing early when they find a bug, because the earlier you find it, the less expensive it is for you to fix it. Security is very much the same thing. You can't punish your employees for making mistakes. I mean, you probably will at some point for some reason, but it's a dangerous thing to do. If a employee does make a mistake, you need to do the best you can to remediate it, train them, help them to not do it again. But you can't have that aspect of fear and reprisal behind it. And I think that's where this cybersecurity awareness training becomes so incredibly important. I talked to a small business development center here in Florida, and we've been trying to put together some training for them and help them explain to even small businesses the risks that their businesses face, even though they don't have a lot of money and they're not, a big IT giant. They can still be targets of opportunity, and help them understand that there are simple things that they can do to make themselves be more secure. And a lot of these attacks, if simple protocols were followed, simple cybersecurity awareness training was adhered to, and like Tomiko pointed out, everybody's human, we make mistakes. So even in the best circumstances, when people know what to do, you'll still slip up every once in a while. So I think it's really important. Management just has to understand not to try to reprimand or go for reprisals or punishment. As someone already said, you've probably got the best staff, the best people that you're going to be able to get, and they want to do their best job. So help them do their best job.
That sounds great, Dr. Hall. I'd also like to hear the answer to the same question from Jason.
So I think when it comes between helping employees and executives, those are two very different audiences, right? And so when I think about making the threats real or the enablement for employees real to executives, some of it is just being able to link what they see in the newspaper to what it is that you may or may not be doing. I really liked sort of what Dr. Hall was saying, where you don't want to punish the employees when it comes to security. One of the things that security already has a bad rep for is telling people no, right? No, you can't install that. No, you can't do that project without security and like as part of this. And so the only other way that you could sort of change that perception about security being this lack of enablement is to be able to enable. And a lot of that comes down to cultural resources, right? Can you have cybersecurity champions, similar to what we just saw from SPP in the earlier presentation? Champions that get identified, as opposed to shaming and naming people out and saying, well, we're going to have people, if it's 4 strikes, you're fired when it comes to phishing attempts. Knowing that numbers are like what, anywhere between 5 or 10% for phishing, that no matter what you say, like, do not click this email and this link, this is a phishing exercise, and someone's like, I'm going to click that. Do you have the ability to fire anywhere from 5 to 10% of your workforce? Likely not. And so keeping those people on, training them, enabling them from a cultural perspective, super important on the employee side. On the exec side, again, linking it to what it is that they see and feel from a pain point and seeing it in the news, and then further being able to sort of exemplify for them some sort of measurement. And measurements aren't going to be great in cybersecurity if you're just starting out. Your first measurement may just be like, how many policies are signed off by leadership? How many different phishing attempts have we gotten? Because we can get those readily available metrics, and then maybe build into something a little bit more creative, talking about sort of mean time to detect, or being able to drive down certain numbers and trends that you want to be able to see in your organization. But it's really a journey. And so for both the employees and executives, I think highlighting that this is a journey, not a destination, and making that part of the culture super important.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jason. Thank you, all the panelists. What an amazing session we have had. These are by far some of the most insightful cyber stories and very relatable, definitely on a professional and personal level. Thank you to our audience. You've been a fantastic crowd, although virtually. And I think this concludes our cybersecurity scary stories session. So we'll have recordings for everyone up shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.